I was halfway through my usual Saturday morning routine, sipping coffee and scrolling mindlessly through social media, when the letter arrived. It was one of those rare moments when you get actual mail that isn't a bill or junk. The envelope was plain, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, my sister Tamsin's. We hadn't spoken in over a year, ever since that blowout at Thanksgiving. So, seeing her handwriting was like a jolt to the system. I tore it open, curiosity getting the better of me. The note was short, almost cryptic. "Alara, there's something you need to know. It's about Mom and Dad. It's important. T." It was classic Tamsin, vague enough to pique my interest but lacking any real substance. Still, it set off a flurry of emotions. "My name is Alara, by the way. I'm 28 and work as an urban planner. I like things orderly, predictable." This letter was neither. I sat there, the words swirling in my mind, creating a storm of anticipation and dread. What could be so important that Tamsin, of all people, felt the need to reach out? The last time we'd talked, she'd accused me of being jealous of her free-spirit lifestyle, whatever that meant. I had walked away then, determined to keep my distance from the family drama that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. I couldn't focus on anything else that day. Nate, my fiancé, noticed. "You okay, Alara?" he asked, looking up from his laptop where he was buried in code. Nate's a software developer, always the calm to my storm. I waved the letter at him, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's from Tamsin. She says there's something I need to know about Mom and Dad." He raised an eyebrow, setting his laptop aside. "Are you going to find out what it is?" I shrugged, though my mind was already made up. "I guess I have to. I mean, what if it's serious?" The thought of Tamsin being the bearer of some crucial family secret was unsettling, but I couldn't ignore it. Nate nodded, understanding without needing to say much. "That's one of the things I love about him. He gets it. Just be careful," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You know how things can get with your family." I did know. Our family dynamics were like a minefield. Lorraine, my mother, always had a way of twisting things to suit her narrative, and my father, Harold, was usually too passive to intervene. It was no wonder Tamsin turned out the way she did, always seeking attention and validation. The next day, I found myself driving to my parents' house, the letter tucked in my bag like a ticking time bomb. The drive was familiar, yet my mind was anything but at ease. Memories of past visits bubbled up, each one tinged with a mix of love and resentment. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Bryce's car parked out front. Of course, Tamsin's partner would be here. Bryce was charming in that slippery sort of way, always around when there was something to gain. I braced myself for the encounter, feeling the tension coil in my stomach. Inside, the house was as pristine as ever, a testament to Lorraine's obsession with appearances. She greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alara, darling. What a surprise." Her tone was sweet, but I could sense the underlying question. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to see Tamsin," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "She wrote me a letter." Lorraine's smile faltered just for a second. "Oh, did she now?" "Well, she's in the living room with Bryce." I thanked her and made my way to the living room. Tamsin was sprawled on the couch, her laughter filling the room as Bryce whispered something in her ear. When she saw me, her expression shifted from joy to something unreadable. "Alara," she said, standing up. "You got my letter?" "Yeah, I did," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What's this about?" Tamsin glanced at Bryce, then back at me. "It's about Mom and Dad. There's something you should know, but it's complicated." Of course it was. With Tamsin, nothing was ever straightforward. I crossed my arms, waiting. "Well, I'm here. So spill." She hesitated, a rare moment of vulnerability flashing across her face. It was enough to throw me off balance, just for a second. "It's better if we talk alone," she finally said. I nodded, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Whatever this was, it was going to change things. I could feel it in my bones. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was ready to dive into the chaos. Tamsin had opened a door, and there was no turning back now. Walking into my parents' house felt like stepping into a play where everyone knew their roles but me. Lorraine was in the kitchen, her voice carrying a hint of forced cheerfulness as she chatted with Harold, who was flipping through a newspaper. Probably more for show than interest. The air was thick with the kind of tension that comes from years of unspoken grievances. I found Tamsin in the living room, still with Bryce, who was lounging on the couch like he owned the place. Seeing them there, so comfortable in my parents' home, made my skin crawl. I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was Tamsin's doing, and how much was my parents' blind indulgence. "Hey, Alara," Bryce said, flashing that trademark grin. Long time no see. Yeah, it's been a while, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't here for pleasantries. Tamsin motioned for me to sit. So, I guess you're wondering why I wrote to you. I nodded, trying to keep my impatience in check. You said it was important. She hesitated, glancing at Bryce. It's about Mom and Dad. They're in some financial trouble. I felt a flicker of concern mixed with skepticism. What kind of trouble? Tamsin leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. They've been giving me money, a lot of it. I told them it was for a business venture, but it wasn't. My heart sank. I knew Tamsin had her issues, but this was a new low. What did you do with the money, Tamsin? She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. I needed it, Alara. For me and Bryce. We're planning a wedding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're using their money for a wedding? Do you even know how much they have left? Bryce interjected, his voice smooth but insincere. It's not as bad as it sounds. We're going to pay them back. I shot him a look, trying to keep my anger in check. And how exactly do you plan to do that? He shrugged, and Tamsin stayed silent, which said more than words ever could. This was typical Tamsin, impulsive and reckless, leaving others to pick up the pieces. I stood up, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I need to talk to Mom and Dad. Tamsin reached out, her voice suddenly pleading. Alara, please. I didn't know who else to turn to. I thought maybe you could help. Help. The word hung in the air, heavy with expectation. I wanted to walk away, to leave them to their mess, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the part of me that still cared, despite everything. I found my parents in the kitchen, Lorraine busying herself with a teapot, Harold still buried in his newspaper. Mom, Dad, can we talk? Lorraine looked up, her smile brittle. Of course, dear. What is it? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I know about the money you've been giving Tamsin. Her face fell, and Harold finally looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and guilt. Alara, it's not what you think, Lorraine started, but I cut her off. Is it true? Are you in financial trouble because of this? Harold sighed, setting the newspaper aside. We thought we were helping her. She said it was important. Important? I repeated, my voice rising. She's using it for a wedding, not a business. Lorraine's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her features. A wedding? She told us. She lied, I said, feeling a surge of frustration. You can't keep enabling her like this. Harold rubbed his temples, looking older than his years. We just wanted to support her, Alara. She's our daughter. And so am I. I snapped, the words out before I could stop them. But you don't see me asking for handouts. Lorraine's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. We didn't know. I took a step back, the reality of the situation settling in. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about fairness, about the years of imbalance that had led us here. I turned to leave, needing air, needing space to think. As I walked out, I heard Lorraine call after me, her voice tinged with desperation. Alara, wait. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until I figured out what to do next. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and I realized that this was just the beginning. Tamsin had opened a door, and now it was up to me to decide whether to close it or walk through. I spent the drive back home replaying the conversation with my parents over and over in my head. I was angry, not just at Tamsin but at the whole situation. It felt like I was the only one who saw the iceberg looming ahead, while everyone else was busy rearranging deck chairs. When I got home, Nate was waiting for me, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. How did it go? He asked, setting aside his laptop. I dropped my bag on the floor, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. It's a mess, Nate. Tamsin's been lying to Mom and Dad, taking money for her wedding. He frowned, leaning back on the couch. And they had no idea? I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. They believed her when she said it was for a business. Now they're in financial trouble, and she doesn't even seem to care. Nate reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, feeling a knot of helplessness tighten in my chest. I want to help them, but I can't keep cleaning up her messes. He nodded, understanding. Maybe it's time they see the truth for themselves. Sometimes people need to face the consequences to change. His words lingered in my mind long after he said them. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time for my parents to see Tamsin for who she really was. But how could I make that happen without tearing the family apart? The next day, I decided to confront Tamsin directly. I needed to know why she thought it was okay to put our parents in such a precarious position. I called her, asking her to meet me at a nearby cafe. She agreed, though her voice held a note of reluctance. When she arrived, she looked as if she hadn't slept. Her usual carefree demeanor was replaced with something more guarded. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I nodded, cutting straight to the point. "Tamsin, why? Why lie to them?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I needed the money, and they always help me out. But this is different," I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're struggling, and you're planning a wedding with their money." Her eyes met mine, a flicker of defiance mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. "It's not just about the money, Alara. It's about proving I can have something good, something real." I leaned back, trying to process her words. "But at what cost? You're risking everything." Tamsin looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know, okay? I know I messed up. But I can't back out now. Bryce is counting on me." Bryce. His name was like a trigger, reminding me of his role in all this. "And what about you? What do you want?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I saw the little sister I used to know, the one who looked up to me, who wanted to be seen. "I just want to be happy, Alara." Her vulnerability caught me off guard, and I felt my resolve waver. But I couldn't let that distract me from the truth. "You need to come clean, Tamsin. They deserve to know the truth." She nodded, a small, resigned gesture. "I know. I will. Just give me some time." As I left the cafe, I realized that this was bigger than just a financial issue. It was about trust, about the twisted dynamics that had shaped our family. I had to find a way to help my parents see that, to protect them from further harm. Back at home, I found myself pacing, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe I could gather proof, something undeniable that would force Tamsin to admit the truth. But how? Then it hit me, Bryce. If I could show my parents what kind of person he was, maybe they'd start questioning everything else. It was a risky plan, but it felt like my only option. I sat down with Nate, outlining my thoughts. He listened, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like a good plan, but be careful. Bryce isn't going to just let you expose him." I nodded, feeling a mix of determination and apprehension. "I know, but I can't just stand by and do nothing." With Nate's support, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about exposing Tamsin's lies, it was about saving my family from themselves. And I was ready to do whatever it took to make that happen. The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Nate and I spent our evenings going over everything we knew about Bryce, trying to find a chink in his armor. It was like piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, but I was determined to make it work. One evening, as we sifted through social media profiles and old messages, Nate paused, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I heard Bryce mentioning something about a failed business deal a while back. Maybe there's something there." I looked up, intrigued. "A failed deal? That could be a lead. If he's in financial trouble, it might explain why he's so eager to marry Tamsin." Nate nodded, his fingers tapping on the keyboard. "I'll see what I can dig up. There has to be something we can use." I watched him work, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. This wasn't just about exposing Bryce. It was about protecting my family, even if they didn't realize they needed saving. The next day, I decided to visit my parents again. I needed to gauge their understanding of the situation and see if there was any way to open their eyes to the truth. As I walked up the path to their house, I noticed Tamsin's car parked outside. My heart sank. This wasn't going to be easy. Inside, I found Lorraine and Harold in the living room, Tamsin sitting between them. The air was tense, like the calm before a storm. Lorraine looked up, her smile strained. "Alara, what brings you here?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to talk about Tamsin's wedding plans." Tamsin shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on the floor. Harold looked between us, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Is there something we should know?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I think it's important you understand the full picture. Tamsin, maybe you should tell them." She glanced at me, a flicker of defiance crossing her face. I was going to Alara. I just needed more time. Lorraine's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into her voice. "What is this about, Tamsin?" Tamsin sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I've been using the money for the wedding, not a business. I didn't want to disappoint you." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. Harold's face fell, a mixture of disappointment and hurt. "Tamsin, why didn't you just tell us?" "I thought I could handle it," she replied, her voice small. "I didn't want you to worry." Lorraine's expression softened, a hint of understanding in her eyes. "We would have helped you no matter what." I watched the exchange, feeling a mix of frustration and relief. At least the truth was out, but it still felt like they were missing the bigger picture. "There's more," I said, drawing their attention back to me. "I think Bryce is in financial trouble. You need to be careful." Tamsin's head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's not true, Alara. You're just trying to ruin everything." "I'm trying to protect you," I shot back, my voice firm. "You need to see him for who he really is." Harold looked between us, uncertainty etched on his face. "Maybe we should talk to Bryce, get his side of the story." Lorraine nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Yes, let's do that. We need to know what's really going on." As I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. Tamsin was defensive, and my parents seemed determined to believe the best in her, no matter what. Back at home, Nate greeted me with a hopeful smile. "I found something," he said, motioning for me to sit beside him. "Bryce was involved in a failed investment deal a few months ago. He's been trying to cover his losses ever since." I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization of what this meant. "So he's using Tamsin to bail himself out." Nate nodded, his expression serious. "It looks that way. We need to show this to your parents." I agreed, but a part of me dreaded the confrontation. This was going to change everything, and I wasn't sure if my family was ready for it. The next day, I returned to my parents' house, armed with the evidence Nate had found. As I walked in, I noticed Bryce sitting in the living room, his charm turned up to full blast as he chatted with Lorraine and Harold. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. The turning point. "Mom, Dad, I need to show you something," I said, holding up the documents. Bryce's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Tamsin looked between us, her expression torn. As my parents read through the evidence, I watched the realization dawn on them. This wasn't just about money or a wedding, it was about trust and betrayal. And as much as it hurt, it was the truth they needed to see. The atmosphere in my parents' living room was suffocating, a tense silence hanging in the air as they processed the documents I'd handed them. Bryce sat rigidly, his usual charm replaced by a thin veneer of calm. Tamsin's eyes darted between us, a silent plea for understanding that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Is this true, Bryce?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of betrayal hung heavily in his words. Bryce forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "It's a misunderstanding, really. Business is unpredictable, you know? But I have it under control." I watched my father, his face etched with disbelief. Lorraine's expression was harder to read, a mix of skepticism and the instinct to protect her own. "How could you not tell us?" she asked, her voice cold and sharp. Tamsin jumped in, her voice wavering. "I didn't know about this, I swear. I thought everything was fine." I wanted to believe her, but the evidence was damning. "Tamsin, you need to see the truth," I said, trying to keep my tone gentle. "This isn't just about you anymore." She looked at me, frustration and fear mingling in her eyes. "You're just trying to ruin everything, Alara. You've always been jealous." The accusation hit harder than I expected, a reminder of the rift between us. "This isn't about jealousy," I replied, my voice firm. "It's about protecting our family." Bryce stood, his demeanor shifting from defensive to accusatory. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Alara. We're handling it." Harold's gaze shifted to Bryce, a flicker of anger breaking through his usual passivity. "Handling it? By lying to us." Bryce opened his mouth to respond, but Lorraine cut him off, her voice icy. "I think you should leave, Bryce. We need to discuss this as a family." He hesitated, glancing at Tamsin, who looked torn between loyalty and reality. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight. "But we'll sort this out." As he left, the room felt both emptier and heavier. Tamsin sat back down, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "I didn't know," she repeated, her voice small. I wanted to comfort her, to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but the truth was too raw. "We need to figure out what to do next," I said, focusing on the immediate problem. Harold nodded, his expression weary. "We'll have to reassess our finances, see what the damage is." Lorraine's gaze softened, a hint of vulnerability breaking through. "We'll get through this. We always do." But as I left their house, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved. The cracks in our family were deeper than I'd realized, and it would take more than words to mend them. Back home, I found Nate waiting with a concerned look. "How did it go?" I collapsed onto the couch, the exhaustion of the day catching up with me. "It's a mess. They're finally seeing Bryce for who he is, but Tamsin, she's still in denial." He sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You did what you could, Alara. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way. I nodded, though the thought offered little comfort. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. Nate squeezed my hand, his presence a steadying force. You've done everything you can. Now it's up to them. As I sat there, I realized that my quest for justice had cost me more than I'd anticipated. I'd exposed the truth, but at what price? The family I'd hoped to protect was more fractured than ever, and I was left questioning my motives. Was it truly justice I sought, or was it revenge for years of feeling sidelined? The next morning, I received a call from Tamsin. Her voice was shaky, a mixture of anger and desperation. Alara, I need your help. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of hope and dread. What's wrong? It's Bryce. He's gone. Just disappeared. I don't know what to do. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut, a new layer of complexity in an already tangled web. Have you called the police? She hesitated, her voice breaking. I'm scared, Alara. What if he's in trouble? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. I'll be there soon. We'll figure this out. As I hung up, I realized that this was the turning point I'd been dreading. My family was on the brink of collapse, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But maybe, just maybe, this was the chance we needed to rebuild, to find a new path forward. And this time, I was determined to see it through. I arrived at Tamsin's apartment, my mind racing with possibilities as I climbed the stairs. The hallway was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made your skin prickle with anticipation. When Tamsin opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression a mix of fear and exhaustion. Alara, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so glad you're here. I stepped inside, the air thick with tension. What happened? She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Bryce just left. No note, no explanation. I don't know what to do. I sat beside her, trying to piece together the situation. Did he take anything with him? Tamsin shook her head, her voice trembling. Just his clothes. But he left his phone behind. It's like he vanished. A chill ran down my spine. This was more than just a fight or a breakup. It felt like something darker. Have you tried calling his friends or family? She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. No one's heard from him. I'm scared, Alara. What if something happened to him? I reached for her hand, trying to offer some comfort. We'll figure it out. Maybe he just needs some space. But as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. Bryce was too calculated for that. This felt like a move in a game I didn't fully understand, and I was running out of pieces. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls and dead ends. Bryce was nowhere to be found, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. Tamsin was a wreck, oscillating between anger and despair, and I was left trying to hold everything together. One evening, as I sat with Nate, a thought struck me. What if Bryce is trying to cover his tracks? What if this is all part of his plan? Nate looked up from his laptop, his expression thoughtful. It's possible. If he's in deeper trouble than we thought, disappearing might be his way of escaping. The idea made my stomach churn. But why leave Tamsin in the dark? She's just as much a victim in all this. Nate shrugged, his eyes meeting mine. Maybe he thinks she'll be safer if she doesn't know. It was a grim thought, but it made a twisted kind of sense. Bryce was always looking out for himself, and if he thought leaving would protect Tamsin, it might have been his only option. The realization left me feeling more helpless than ever. I wanted to protect my sister, to shield her from the fallout of her choices, but I was running out of options. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, hoping for some news about Bryce. But the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a woman's voice, cold and businesslike. Is this Alara Collins? Yes, I replied, my nerves on edge. Who is this? I'm calling from the bank. We need to discuss the outstanding debts associated with Bryce Miller. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I'm sorry, what? The woman continued, her tone matter of fact. Bryce Miller has substantial debts, and your name is linked to several of them. We need to arrange a meeting to discuss repayment options. I felt the room spin, a mix of anger and disbelief surging through me. I had no idea. How is that possible? Your sister, Tamsin Collins, co-signed several loans with Mr. Miller. As her closest relative, we assumed you might be able to assist. I hung up, my mind reeling. This was the final twist, the complication that made everything feel impossibly bleak. Bryce hadn't just left, he'd left a trail of destruction, and now it was up to me to pick up the pieces. When I told Tamsin, her reaction was a mix of shock and guilt. I didn't know Alara. I swear. I thought I was helping him. I wanted to be angry, to blame her for her naivety, but all I felt was a deep, aching sadness. "We'll figure it out," I said, though the words felt like a lie. As I sat in my apartment that night, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. My quest for justice had turned into a nightmare, and I was left questioning everything. Was revenge worth the cost? Was protecting my family even possible when they seemed determined to self-destruct? But as I looked at Nate, his unwavering support a beacon in the chaos, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. We'd faced the worst, and now it was time to rebuild. Not just for my family, but for myself. And this time, I was determined to see it through no matter the cost. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. Tamsin had called a family meeting, insisting it was time to face everything head-on. The air was electric with tension as we gathered in my parents' living room, each of us bracing for what was to come. Lorraine sat rigidly in her chair, her eyes flicking between Tamsin and me, searching for answers in our expressions. Harold stood by the window, his back to us, as if the view might offer some escape from the confrontation looming over us. Tamsin took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've asked you all here because I need to come clean," she began, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I watched her, a mix of pride and apprehension swirling in my chest. This was it, the moment we'd all been avoiding, and yet it was the only way forward. "I've made mistakes," Tamsin continued, her gaze meeting each of ours in turn. "I've lied and I've let Bryce manipulate me. And I'm sorry." Lorraine's expression softened, a flicker of maternal instinct breaking through her usual facade. "Tamsin, why didn't you come to us sooner?" Tamsin shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was scared. Scared of disappointing you, of losing everything." Harold turned from the window, his voice gentle but firm. "We're your family, Tamsin. We're supposed to help each other." I felt a surge of emotion, the weight of years of resentment and misunderstanding pressing down on me. This was my chance to finally speak my truth. "It's not just about helping," I said, my voice steady but charged with emotion. "It's about being honest with each other, about facing the truth, no matter how hard it is." Tamsin nodded, her gaze locked on mine. "I know, and I'm ready to do that if you'll give me the chance." The room fell silent, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. Lorraine looked at me, her eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. "Ilara, what do you think?" I took a deep breath, the moment stretching out before me like a chasm. This was my chance to choose, to decide whether revenge or reconciliation would guide my path. "I think we need to start fresh," I said finally, my voice strong. "But that means being honest, even when it hurts." Tamsin nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I can do that. I want to do that." Harold stepped forward, placing a hand on Tamsin's shoulder. "We're here for you, Tamsin. Whatever it takes." The tension in the room eased, a fragile truce forming as we each took a step toward healing. But just as I thought we'd reached a resolution, the door swung open, and Bryce walked in, his expression a mix of defiance and desperation. "I heard you were having a family meeting," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something darker. "I thought I'd join." The room froze, the fragile peace shattered by his unexpected arrival. Tamsin stood, her face a mask of shock and anger. "Bryce, what are you doing here?" He shrugged, his gaze sweeping over us. "I came to set things straight. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not the only one." I felt a surge of anger, my hands clenching into fists. "You've done more than make mistakes, Bryce. You've lied and manipulated everyone here." He met my gaze, his eyes narrowing. "And you haven't? You've been so focused on exposing me that you didn't stop to think about the damage you were causing." The accusation hung in the air, a mirror reflecting my own fears back at me. Had I been so consumed by my quest for justice that I'd lost sight of what really mattered? Tamsin stepped forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. "This isn't about blame, Bryce. It's about moving forward." He looked at her, a flicker of something, regret maybe, crossing his face. "I want that too, but I can't do it alone." The room was silent, each of us grappling with the weight of his words. This was the unexpected twist, the moment where everything could change if we let it. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. "Then let's figure it out together," I said, surprising myself with the words. "But it has to be different this time." Bryce nodded, a tentative truce forming as we faced the future together. It wasn't the resolution I'd imagined, but maybe it was the one we needed. A chance to rebuild, to find a new way forward. And as I looked around the room, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were finally ready to take it. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a new beginning. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple white dress I'd chosen. It was a small ceremony, just as Nate and I had planned, surrounded by a few close friends who had become our family. Nate appeared behind me, his reflection smiling warmly. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. I turned to face him, feeling a wave of gratitude and love. "I can't believe we're finally here." He took my hands, squeezing them gently. "We've been through a lot, Alara. But we made it." As we prepared to head to the venue, my thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought us here. The conflicts, the revelations, the moments of doubt and clarity. Each one had shaped us, bringing us closer to this moment. The ceremony was held in a small garden, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Tamsin sitting in the front row, her eyes glistening with tears. She gave me a small, encouraging nod, and I knew we'd finally found a way to move forward together. Lorraine and Harold sat beside her, their expressions a mix of pride and reflection. The past few weeks had been a time of healing for all of us, a chance to rebuild the trust that had been broken. The vows Nate and I exchanged were simple but heartfelt, a promise to support and cherish each other as we faced whatever the future held. As we said, "I do," I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling of having finally found my place. After the ceremony, as we mingled with our guests, Lorraine approached me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Alara, I want to apologize," she said, her voice steady, "for everything. I know I haven't always been fair to you." I was taken aback, the words unexpected but welcome. "Mom, thank you," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "I appreciate it." She nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. "We're all learning, aren't we?" I smiled, realizing how true that was. We were all works in progress, trying to find our way in a world that was often unpredictable and challenging. As the afternoon wore on, I found a quiet moment with Tamsin. She looked at me, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she said, her voice sincere. I shrugged, feeling a warmth spread through me. "We're sisters. We'll always have each other's backs." She nodded, a smile breaking through. "I'm going to make things right, Alara. I promise." I believed her. We'd both come a long way, and I knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Nate and I shared a quiet moment together. "How do you feel?" he asked, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. I leaned into him, feeling content and hopeful. "I feel like we're exactly where we're meant to be." He kissed the top of my head, his presence a comforting anchor. "I'm glad," he said simply. As I looked around at the people who had become my family, I realized that the journey we'd taken had been worth every struggle, every moment of doubt. We'd faced our demons, found forgiveness, and discovered the strength to move forward. But as the evening drew to a close, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to come. Life was full of surprises, after all, and I was ready to face them with the people I loved by my side. As Nate and I left the garden, hand in hand, I felt a sense of anticipation for the future. We'd built a foundation of honesty and respect, and I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. And as we walked into the twilight, I realized that while some questions might remain unanswered, the journey itself was the reward. We'd found our way through the darkness, and now, we were ready to embrace whatever light lay ahead.